rhetoric between North Korea and the United States has long been bellicose and acrimonious. But over the past few weeks, the back and forth has escalated even further and grown arguably more ominous. Nick Schifrin has the story.
For decades, North Korea has rallied its population with propaganda calling the U.S. an existential threat. This weekend, more than 100,000 North Koreans, scripted, staged, and suited, pledged allegiance to leader Kim Jong-un. The banner reads, "If the U.S. attacks us, wipe them out forever." The propaganda machine goes even further. Videos show North Korea targeting the White House and destroying the Capitol. Up until recently, the U.S. had tried not to match bombastic threats with threats. But today, name-calling brinksmanship is mutual.
Rocket Man should have been handled a long time ago.
And a Kim Jong-un statement read by a North Korean TV presenter.
I will surely and definitely tame the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire.
The war of words has been escalating all year. On January 2nd, President Trump tweeted, "North Korea just stated it is in the final stages of developing a nuclear weapon capable of reaching parts of the U.S. It won't happen." By July, the North Koreans did test an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of hitting the United States. The next month, the president laid down a new red line.
North Korea best not make any more threats to the United States. They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
North Korea crossed that line some 24 hours later, threatening to envelop U.S. territory, Guam.
Sound dialogue is not possible with such a guy, bereft of reason, who is going senile.
The tit-for-tat continued at the United Nations General Assembly.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
It's an absurd reality. A person like Trump, a mentally deranged person, full of megalomania and complacency, holds the nuclear button.
Over the weekend, President Trump tweeted that if North Korean officials repeated specific threats, they won't be around much longer. And the North Korean foreign minister responded,
"Since the United States declared war on our country, we have every right to take countermeasures, including shooting down the United States strategic bombers. The question of who will be around much longer will be answered then."
Today, President Trump repeated his threats and said Kim Jong-un started it.
He's saying things that should never, ever be said, and we're replying to those things, but it's a reply. It's not an original statement, it's a reply.
To talk about whether the president's rhetoric really is a reply and whether the war of words increases the chances of war, we get two views. Kathleen Stevens was a career diplomat and served as U.S. ambassador to South Korea and Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. She joins us from Stanford University, where she is a fellow. And Balbina Huang was a special advisor to the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific Affairs and is now a visiting professor at Georgetown University. And thank you to you both. Ambassador Stevens, let me start with you. Do you believe that President Trump's might actually be reducing U.S. options, perhaps bringing us either closer to war or proving U.S. threats meaningless?
Well, I am really baffled and very concerned about this engagement by, for the first time, I think, by an American president in this kind of tit-for-tat, rhetorical, I think you call it brinksmanship, with the North Korean leader. I think this is beneath us. I subscribe to Teddy Roosevelt's speak softly and carry a big stick if you're a great power like the United States. There's a lot of things about the Trump administration's policies towards North Korea, which I think have been very sound and being pursued by Secretary Mattis and Secretary Tillerson. And this war of words is undermining those efforts. It's going to make diplomacy more difficult. It's confused our allies. It's strengthened, I think, Kim Jong-un's assertion to his own people that he was right. In fact, this is what he said in reply to President Trump's UN statement about totally destroying North Korea. He was right to pursue nuclear weapons. He's not going to stop. So I think this is complicating the administration's own efforts, ironically, and even more immediately, making it very, very difficult to manage that situation on the Korean Peninsula, which has always been about managing escalation and preventing escalation and preventing misunderstanding. We've been close to war many times on the Korean Peninsula in the past years, and we've had to work very quietly, I think, to manage that. This kind of war of words between the two leaders makes it much more difficult.
Professor Huang, are the threats ineffective, or could they actually be effective?
Well, I actually think, rather oddly, that in fact they are being effective. We have to remember it's not so much that I disagree with Ambassador Stevens, but I do think that President Obama, for example, for 8 years, did take the high road. And I think he was being very firm, and he did try negotiations, but essentially had a policy of being tough where he needed to be. But actually carrying the soft stick didn't work in the sense that it did not deter North Korea. It did not bring North Korea to the negotiating table. And so, of course, going down to sort of schoolyard level and this kind of matching rhetoric may not necessarily help. But on the other hand, it does set very clear what U.S. intentions are and what this president is not willing to tolerate. That's not the worst thing as far as North Korea is concerned.
Well, what about that, Professor Stevens? I mean, perhaps these threats are effective deterrents.
You know, I'm not for a soft stick. I'm for a hard stick, and I think that, and I do support the steps both that the previous administration have taken and that President Trump has taken to strengthen deterrence, to strengthen defense, to demonstrate a determination to defend our allies as well as our homeland. But we're a big country. We're a great power, and I think we need to. And our words matter. One thing that strikes me from my many years in Asia is that the words that an American president says, the words that any American official says, are pored over and analyzed, whether it's in Seoul or Tokyo or Pyongyang. And I've heard that there are units of bright young diplomats and analysts in both Pyongyang and Seoul whose sole task is to read everything that President Trump tweets and says, particularly with relation to the region, and try to figure out what it is he's saying. And it seems so completely at odds with things that are said sometimes by himself the day before, the day after, and certainly by Secretary Mattis, Secretary Tillerson, who have outlined a strategy of, as they put it, maximum pressure, maximum engagement. What President Trump is doing in this very ad hominem tit-for-tat with someone who is way beneath us is demeaning, I think, his own position, the position of the United States, and the efforts of his own diplomats and military leaders.
So, Professor Huang, are these threats undermining some of the other members of the administration?
Well, there does seem to be some confusion about that. On the other hand, again, yes, president's words matter, but taken in the context of what this president says and does in terms of tweeting, I think, again, even our foreign audience does understand that every single statement that comes out of the president may not necessarily need to be taken so seriously. And, in fact, the confusion might also convince the North Korean leaders that they need to act with more caution. I think the more important point is what is behind the actions. What actions are we taking, and what actions are North Korea taking? And right now, there are no actual military actions that indicate that either is on the brink of waging war with the other. That's actually more important.
And Ambassador, to that point, I mean, could these threats be effective where, frankly, a lot of the diplomacy in the past was not?
I don't think the threats are effective, and I think as the discussion before we started this talk demonstrated, the problem with threats is, and certainly red lines, is if you draw red lines, and it's not just the Trump administration that's seen this, but others, and then the North Koreans cross it, what happens? It is a problem of credibility. It's a problem, and I think there's a big problem if the words of our president are not taken seriously. It really reduces our ability to influence and shape events. That said, I do agree with Balbina that my own assessment, and there may be some hopeful thinking in this, is that neither side wants a war. I'm worried about the inadvertent miscalculation that can happen in what is a highly militarized environment, one in which President Trump, for the first time, and even putting aside the kind of childish ad hominem attacks on each other, but where he has strayed, he has demonstrated no awareness of the kind of traditional kind of clarity of deterrence, how we deter each other, how we signal intentions. I don't think that uncertainty is a good thing. No one, perhaps the president himself, knows, is he really talking when he talks about a response the world has never seen before? Is he talking about a nuclear response or not? We don't know. Yes, I think that gives Pyongyang pause, but that doesn't give me any comfort, because I think it also, as I mentioned, says to Kim Jong-un, he says, well, I was right to try to develop my own nuclear deterrent. I think the challenge now is to find a way to go forward and deter each other.
Quickly, Professor Huang, I mean, giving Kim Jong-un pause, isn't that part of the point?
That's exactly right. And in fact, uncertainty, while it does make us anxious, uncertainty is what drives North Korea's insecurity. And I think in this case, insecurity is what's going to push North Korea back to the negotiating table. If anything, it does.
Professor Huang, thank you very much. And Ambassador Stevens, thanks to you both.